day for football. Fall weather, sunshine. Be any better than this.
Welcome to the spotlight, Brian Griese, who makes his first ever NFL start on a big night for the Broncos quarterback of all time, and one of the great Dolphins of all time. Monday Night Countdown is next. It's an indelible image, a snapshot not soon forgotten. So childlike, so innocent, so revealing. It was the culmination of a career, an affirmation of greatness. 16 years of football life couldn't prepare him for this moment, this final bow. We knew then this was one for the scrapbook. A third would soon be out of the question. Now the impossible task rests in improbable hands. For Brian Griese, football wasn't even a notion when his father reached legendary status. 2 championships at Miami in search of a third. The son's time has now come. Time to embrace the same history, confront the same burning questions his father once did a quarter century ago. First obstacle in the way, the game's greatest passer. No quarterback has thrown for more yards. No quarterback has thrown as many touchdowns. Yet one title has eluded him. Only a championship stands between Dan Marino and fulfillment. 2 teams, 2 men chasing pro football's summit. One trying to exercise his only remaining demon and add to his legacy. The other simply trying to uphold a family tradition. That's the story this Monday night. The final act in kickoff 99, Broncos Dolphins Week 1, ahead on tonight's game, Super Bowl. It all begins at Mile High first, and here's Sal Paolantonio to set the scene. Hi, Sal.
Hi, Mike. It's one of those cool, dry, glorious Rocky Mountain evenings here in Denver, and the city is absolutely electric with anticipation for what should be a very historic night. Of course, John Elway will be honored at halftime, and the Broncos will begin to learn about life without number 7 for the first time in 17 years. But the Dolphins want no part of history. They remember the 38-3 drubbing at the hands of the Broncos on January 9th right here in this stadium during the playoffs. Let's get right to the injury report. Cecil Collins, the rookie running back, is out, and Stanley Pritchard is a little bit banged up, so Rob Conrad of Syracuse, the rookie, will start in his place. The Broncos are injury-free, Mike.
That is good news for them, Sal, as they look to try to set a little NFL history. They are going for an NFL record, after all, tonight. Most consecutive home wins. The Dolphins hold that record. The Packers second. What's really interesting on this list, guys, look at 1 and 2, and then later on down the list with the Cowboys. The records were stopped on Monday Night Football, an opportunity for the Dolphins to do that and keep the Broncos from eclipsing their all-time mark. Dan the Man made his NFL debut on a Monday night back in 1983 when the Raiders were in L.A. Since then, he's put up some pretty decent numbers in the history of Monday Night Football. You know, Sal Paolantonio, if Dan Marino saw the highlights of Vinny Testaverde and his Achilles injury, it had to bring back memories for Dan of his injury, but also at the same time, knowing in the back of his mind, Elway's gone, Vinny's down, this might be my year.
Well, absolutely, Mike. And, you know, with John Elway's gala retirement tonight at halftime, Dan Marino was last of that 1983 class of quarterbacks still standing. And tonight is the beginning of what Jimmy Johnson and the Dolphins hope will be a Super Bowl run for the greatest quarterback, perhaps, not to have a championship ring.
You know, he's excited. He's like a kid in the candy store. You know, you look out there and he's got the talent around him that he's always wanted. He's excited about it.
And Marino is especially juiced up about settling the score with a Broncos team that battered the Dolphins in the divisional playoffs in January.
I think it'll have an impact, sure, because we'll be able to look and see, you know, and call up the experience of getting beat on the road in Denver in a playoff game. And, you know, we want to change that around, obviously. I think that we'll be in better shape because we'll be healthier.
We feel that was not our team. Now we have our team. So I think once we get on the field, you'll see a totally different attitude. I mean, it's not what we're thinking about, but once you step back out there, I think it's going to come up. It's going to come to surface. It's going to be like a playoff atmosphere, just like it was last year. So I think it'll be like deja vu.
Well, if you remember, after that 38-3 embarrassing loss, it was made a lot worse by the comments of Shannon Sharpe. Sharpe was asked about Dan Marino after the game, and he said, quote, "Don't ask me about Dan Marino. I don't want to talk about losers." Sharpe, of course, apologized, but I am sure, Mike, that Dan Marino has not forgotten about those comments.
Shannon's not talking now this year to avoid situations like that. Just took him a while to learn.
You know what took him so long?
His brother
He's not the smarter of the two, as you can see.
But he's the better looking.
He was, well, he's close.
What about Dan and his situation this year with Miami?
Well, I think you have to look at the last 3 Super Bowl participants. The one thing you have to look at, 1,465 yards for Dorsey Levens 2 years ago. Terrell over 2,000 last year. 3 years ago, the two-headed monster, Edgar Bennett and Dorsey Levens, over 1,400 yards. Throw because you want to, not because you have to. And over the past 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years, we're used to seeing Dan Marino throw because he has to. If he can get a running game and throw because he wants to, use the play-action pass, he can get to Atlanta in 2000.
Sterling, the key to good, consistent, efficient offense is balance. You must have good run-pass distribution. This may be the best balanced offense Dan Marino will have around him. You now have the deep threat in Tony Martin. You have one of the game's best possession receivers in O.J. McDuffie. A solid offensive line. A solid tight end in Troy Drayton. Big question mark. Can Johnson or Cecil Collins really pick it up in the running game?
You know, the running game is the absent factor. You don't believe us? Look at these numbers. And you think about 16-game seasons. 1,000-yard rusher doesn't mean what it did in the 12-game seasons. In all these 16-game seasons, the top rusher for the Dolphins only once over 1,000 yards, and that was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in '96. The absence of a constant rushing threat's been a major hurdle in championship hopes. Some perspective on Marino's continuing quest from ESPN, the magazine's Dan Levitard, with his Monday Night Minute.
The background sound to Dan Marino's 17th season is the clock softly ticking, every limping step he takes bringing him that much closer to the end. We recently saw John Elway erase all the losing from his legend, and now we root for Marino too because he is, rather literally, on his last legs. You see it when he hobbles through the locker room before games, his right calf smaller than his left, a screw in his ankle, a protective sneaker encasing an Achilles heel that won't allow him to stand on his toes. Marino turns 38 Wednesday, and his wife Claire reminds him many Dolphins are closer in age to their 13-year-old than to him. But that's just a playful way of saying something painful, that there isn't much time left. Marino's passing rating is better than all 18 Hall of Fame QBs, and his 408 career TD passes is more than the Tampa Bay Bucs. But he doesn't own the one jewel that bridges the gulf between Joe Montana's legacy and Dan Fouts'. The greatest passer ever has never won a championship, and hasn't even played for one since 1984, when he left the losing Super Bowl locker room with his tuxedo slung over his shoulder, still crisp in the dry cleaning bag. Tonight in Denver, 15 years later, Dan Marino gets all dressed up again, preparing for a party we could all celebrate, but a party that may never come.